It's weird, isn't it? We have more therapy than ever, more medications than ever, more awareness than ever. We've broken from the stigma of the past, and yet mental health struggles of every kind are still rising. In some ways, you could argue we're worse off than before the so-called mental health revolution even started. And maybe this is your story or someone close to you. You've done all the right things, and yet somehow it's not working. Mental health content floods your feed, but it's become like white noise. You're tired of grifters, tired of quick fixes, tired of the same recycled slogans. It's clear the mental health revolution of the 2010s didn't deliver what we hoped. But the real question is why? What are we missing? The only way to answer that is to bring together what you might call the Avengers of mental health. A one-of-a-kind team-up with three of the most influential voices in the world. At Columbia, Dr. Lisa Miller has shown how spirituality and mental health are inseparable. At Stanford, Dr. Anna Lembke has exposed how addiction and culture are hijacking the brain. And at Harvard, Dr. Uma Naidu has established a gut-brain connection showing how what we eat shapes how we feel. They come from the most prestigious institutions. They're all best-selling authors recognized globally, and each brings a missing piece of the puzzle. And together, they give us the whole story of mental health. If you're new to Mighty Pursuit, we exist to help you make sense of the whole person, mind, body, and spirit, not as vague wellness cliches, but as deeply interconnected parts of your everyday experience. We believe putting the whole person back together is the key to living well. And in today's episode, we zoom into our mental health category, showing that mental health is never just one thing. It's shaped by our physical health, by our sense of higher purpose, and by our connection to something greater than ourselves. This is the first time these voices have come together, a rare chance to hear from the very people who have shaped the global conversation on mental health, all in one place. And when you put all these pieces together, you'll see a path forward that is hopeful, practical, and actually produces real change. So let's begin. So I want to take us back to 2020 when Lady Gaga sat down with Oprah, and this was watched by like millions of views. And so she went on and she talked about her testimony. It was a very powerful testimony and interview. And she pointed to therapy, medication, and was really raising awareness around mental health at that time. And it was such a powerful interview because it felt like an exclamation point on what had been happening for the previous 10 years before that. Like here you have a big celebrity coming out, talking about their mental health, when previously there was a lot of stigma and taboo around that. And there was like a lot of hope and conversation that was being drummed up around mental health. But I think the confusing part for a lot of people after like a moment like that, and a lot of celebrities coming out and a lot of conversation around mental health, is that, you know, we have more medication than ever before, more therapy than ever before, and more content and awareness around mental health than ever before. And yet, if you look at the statistics, a lot of them are stagnant, but some of them are getting worse. And so I wanted to open that up and just get your guys' perspective on like when you see this moment where we're at in 2025 after this kind of mental health boom revolution, what do you see?
I think that it's great that there's awareness, that there's not stigma, but at the same time, I think we've been sliding towards a culture of depression, where depression is no longer an individual experience or something to be treated, but it is something in the fabric of our culture, particularly plaguing and I think oppressing Gen Z. Depression is an opportunity for a shift in our growth and our awareness. Depression's a knock at the door for a deepening and an awakening. The way that depression has been picked up by our culture is that, oh, everything is so bad out there. You know, my parents' generation ruined the environment, and oh, look, it's the reds, it's the blues. But depression is a seed of being, and I think we're a little bit, it's time for a course correction.
You know, I think that there is still a stigma around mental illness in certainly certain cultures more than others. I'm pleased to say and see that in the US it is significantly improved. But I also feel like mental health was in a crisis long before COVID, and the important commentary that came from interviews like that raised awareness. Also, lots of athletes came forward, which I think was important. But what I feel COVID did is it it uncovered that crisis and brought it more front and center. I think it was always there, but it also got worse. And so I'm glad for that. And I feel like people just need more well-vetted resources to get their information and to understand what they need to do and to see that there are more options than just medications and therapy, and to integrate that. So I've never believed one or the other. I think that it's each person, each human, it has to be personalized, whether it comes to nutrition and lifestyle interventions, looking at their metabolism. So they might need all of those components to help their mental well-being. But I also agree with what you're saying. I think rather than perceive depression or even anxiety as something negative or even a lack of focus, why not use that to harness and move ourselves forward in a different way rather than sinking into it, rather lean into it in a different way. So I think that also provides an opportunity for people to feel better in different ways and be more open to whatever treatment plan comes together and what that involves.
I echo both of what you all have said. I guess, as a psychiatrist who sees the full spectrum of mental health disorders, I certainly believe that the brain is an organ like any other, and it can be diseased or impaired or injured, and that will manifest as a variety of different types of psychiatric and psychological problems. But if I look at it sort of over the long haul, I really feel that, our civilization has reached a tipping point where it is lack of meaning, purpose, and occupation that really plagues most of us now. There will always be that 1% of individuals who, in any environment, will struggle with things like delusions or hallucinations or profound debilitating depression or what have you. But I think most of us now are struggling with having no meaning and purpose, lots of leisure time, disposable income. We really are making it up as we go along because there's nothing that we actually have to be doing. We have all of our basic needs met, and it's a very strange way to go through life, and not at all how we evolved, right? We evolved for a world of scarcity. We evolved to have to work very hard just to survive, and that's the opposite of how we live now. So I think it's a really challenging and weird time to be alive, and not at all surprising to me that many of us are struggling. And then you add in, the communications revolution, digital media, social media, how that has bred more isolation, more self-stimulation, a kind of, auto-stimulation independent of the need for other people. And let's face it, we are incredibly social creatures and we're not interacting. So, I'm not going to be alive long enough to see how this all gets resolved. I do have faith that we'll figure it out, but this is a very bizarre inflection point, I would say, in human history.
Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting. I mean, I was researching and studying this a little bit last week, but if you go back like 150 years, I mean, it's insane just what people had to go through in terms of survival is compared to today, right? So I was reading a statistic like something like 27% of France in the early 1800s, like by age 18, like kids were dead. And by 35, it was like a much higher number than that. And so I just don't know, like, were those people severely struggling with their mental health, or has like something like fundamentally changed where we just like can't cope with life today in some sort of way that's affected this generation?
Well, I mean, if you look at statistics on leisure time, I mean, that's fascinating because, 100 years ago, people had almost no leisure time. They worked from dawn till dusk. They were lucky if they had 1.5 day off per week. And now, the average American at least works about 5 hours a day. 20 years from now, that's projected to be about 3 hours a day. And yet we have more disposable income than ever before, more access to luxury goods than ever before. So life is very, very different. And, as everybody knows, we now have built these machines that do a lot of our work for us. What are we actually going to do with ourselves and our time? I think that's a looming question.
So that's fascinating, right? If AI makes us unemployed as busybodies, what is the deeper meaning and purpose in life? This could be the opportunity for our civilization.
I hope so.
I mean, you guys interact with and have interacted with so many people over the years. So what are the things that you're hearing in your office?
What I'm hearing a lot of is how do I scan through information on social media and get either proper nutrition information or advice. Someone shared this very new app or whatever it is with young people who are not qualified in any medical way. We spoke about this before we started recording, offering advice on loneliness and stuff, and probably going to be successful because they're able to reach an audience. But I hear a lot from people that I speak to, how do I discern the information out there? In the work that I do, doctors have not been trained to study nutrition. And 20% of our medical schools still kind of stagnant at that point. So part of that is, how do I have that conversation if they're not really going to have the information? And then if they don't have it, where do I seek that information? And do I just eat celery and not eat anything else? Or I just eat meat and no spinach? I mean, there's all this sort of black and white thinking, or this eat this, not that mentality. So I hear a lot of that because of the practice I have. But I think that in the larger scheme of things, the biggest thing I see is this ripple of anxiety that has really permeated through COVID and lasted in everything from humans to pets. People also report their pets are anxious and will describe things, and I'll be like, well, maybe you should speak to the vet about something, seriously, something to calm them down, because it's sort of this collective angst that is going on. So, and I'm not sure of the exact reason. I think it was an interesting point that you made, but it's there. And so those are probably the two things I hear the most.
Yeah, no, that's interesting with the kind of, there's so much information now, and there's so many people. That's why I'm excited to have this panel. There's so many people online who are proposing ideas, and it's just like this swath of information. And if you have a microphone and you're charismatic and you sound like you know what you're talking about, then you're going to get a lot of people. But then you end up following those things down the line, and it actually doesn't work for you, and then you probably potentially might be more depressed than you were before. So.
And lonely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, in many ways, the democratization of knowledge is a good thing. I think giving more people platforms, getting more ideas out there. But yes, we tend to take these things to an extreme to make them want them to be more concrete than they really are. So it's what people are doing with that information. And of course, the sort of polarization and the silos is concerning for sure.
So what do you guys see, like up close? What are people saying? What are they struggling with? And what kind of depths do they feel like they can't get out of?
I work with Gen Z and some millennials, and what I see is, hey, let's help. We want to change our world. We want a more spiritually aware world. Yes, there is divisiveness, and yes, there is this looming despair, but we can live otherwise. And I see torchbearers. I see young adults wanting to re-illuminate our world, wanting to have a different type of society. I'm full of hope.
Yeah, that's awesome. I see that too, especially Gen Z. They're sort of in many ways rejecting, what their parents did. Not in a way that says you got it wrong, but just sort of like, hey, the world's a different place, and we want to figure out how to have a more thriving existence. But I also do see
with ethics first.
Yeah.
Gen Z is, I think, an exquisitely ethical generation.
Interesting.
Meticulously ethical.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I hope so. That'd be awesome. I don't know. I mean, I still see a lot of kind of external achievement oriented. Like, I see this kind of two paths, this kind of extreme achievement oriented, appearance driven, cohort. And then I see this cohort of people who just kind of have completely given up. and aren't trying and are, in despair. So I do see a little bit of, that kind of hopeful stuff. But yeah, no, I think there's a lot of sort of struggling out there, people wondering where to go next. And yeah, I mean, in my work, obviously people looking for and using the next drug, we see a lot more nitrous oxide right now, which used to come in these little, whippet-like balloons. And now you can get a giant scuba, diving canister of it and use it all day long. Super scary, that kind of access without prohibitions or guardrails, for a very potent drug. Kratom has totally taken over. We've got lots and lots of people now who are using hallucinogens nominally to have a spiritual awakening, but really they're just using it to get high.
Like psychedelics?
Yeah, psychedelics, hallucinogens, using it to get high.
How do you work with them when there's a spiritual quest, there's a hunger, and there's a quick hit with psychedelics? Where could you go from there that was growth inspiring?
Yeah. Well, I think, we always start with kind of exploring their experience, and what was spiritual about it and what meaning it had for them. But then also talking about like, why do the drugs have to come into play again and again? And what might be going on there that's really not about your spiritual path, but just really about, let's face it, getting high. And trying to bring in a lot more, God forbid, God talk into the room is something that I try to do. It's really taboo. I remember I had a colleague not that long ago, an internist, who was telling me that she was kind of in a quandary because she has a patient, an elderly patient, a Jewish man who was at the end of his life, and he really wanted to talk about spirituality with her, but she felt uncomfortable because even though she also is Jewish, she was taught not to talk about, spiritual things in her medical role. So I think we can change that.
I think that's what needs to change.
Yes, we need to change that.
I see the angst and the despair as spiritual atrophy in our culture.
Yeah.
And so why are thousands of people knocking at the door for therapy? It's actually a spiritual crisis.
Yeah, agreed.
Why do you think that's become taboo to even talk about that? It seems odd, like in academia and in medicine, like to talk about God or spirituality. Because from my perspective, like, I don't know how what you believe about the world would not impact your mental health, right? Like this big picture thing of what you believe about the world, how would that not impact your mental health? And yet that sort of conversation is taboo.
I'm not sure of the reason, but I do know that in residency and in mental health training, there's certainly more people than I don't know the exact stat on that, but there are a lot of people who are agnostic. I mean, just don't necessarily have a religious background. And the way that I would interact with that is with colleagues is that I was raised a certain way. I'm Hindu. I was raised with a sense of spirituality. So I've just been always very inclusive in how I handle patients or how I deal with colleagues. And if you don't believe in God or you just, that's not your thing, I respect that. But I'm going to work with my patients in a way that, or help people or my friends and family in a way that speaks to my authenticity, but while respecting their boundaries. Because I think that you're missing out if you don't tap into that belief system. And garner that as a strength, especially if they're struggling. So it's I'm not sure the reason. You might know better, but I don't.
I think we're coming out of an ice age that 45, 50 years ago, there was a big movement in the United States. Take down the Christmas tree, take down the Hanukkah menorah from City Hall. We don't talk about religion or spiritual life in the public square. And that prohibition led to the silencing of 2 generations. We've effectively had an ice age on free expression and spiritual discourse in the public square. 40 years is long enough for someone to have a child who grows up who is now completely spiritually non-conversant, who's never meditated or prayed by the side of a parent or grandparent, who's read no sacred text whatsoever. That is, through the lens of science, malnourishment of our innate spiritual capacity.
Yeah, that was so beautifully said. I think that's really so true. And the other thing is that, the medical system is founded on scientism, this idea that science has an answer for every question and every problem, and it really dominates as a hegemony in the science and academic world. So it's in many ways taboo to talk about your faith or spirituality or the great unknown or the mystery of the universe. It's not just even that you're not supposed to do it. It's really that you're seen as weak or less bright, less smart, maybe even mentally ill. So I think it goes further. That's not universally true, but I think it's sort of embedded in the academic and scientific culture.
Well, and scientism, the profound arrogance around scientism. Yeah. In keeping with what you're saying, I think scientism includes a latent radical materialism that somehow it's only real if we can knock it and touch it.
That's right.
I think because I work on the in a different world, in a different intersection of science, nutrition, food, culinary arts, and mental health. I just have always been, for the most part of my career, always been sort of in a different space, and I've been able to. I feel that you can always back something up by science. And I say to people, if you study nutritional neuroscience, you can always, I think I've said this to you before, you can always find an opposite study for anything we say. So I live in that zone of being able to help people navigate it as best I can. I certainly don't assume to know everything, but I also find it really difficult to be around professionals who just, are always about the evidence because that's the only thing. There was a recent article that actually showed some real fraudulent work going on in some publications. So the worry that I have is we want to be able to assess the science as carefully as we can to the best of our knowledge, always be humble about it, always, speak to your peers about it, get the best advice, but don't make that the sword you die on, because there is much more. And there are so many more nuances, even around the so-called evidence base that we have. And not to say that we shouldn't use those guidelines, but always know there's more.
If the dominant model were entirely sufficient, then we wouldn't have a mental health crisis.
That's true. We would have got it.
We don't just need more therapist chairs. We need more therapists like these.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's like two simultaneous conversations that could be happening within science with the spirituality question. One of them is this kind of intellectual pursuit of, is this true or not? Like empirically, objectively, does God exist? And those sorts of questions, there's been, we can't figure this out, we can't know an answer, or just a reluctance to have those conversations. But then the opposite is like, you can study whether spirituality has an impact on someone's mental health. And so it's almost like a detriment to the entire conversation of like, because you don't want to put an answer on if you think this is true or not, and you think we should just do away with it, it actually then, I guess, has a profound impact on people's mental health, because if they do believe in it, whether it's true or not, I'd imagine there's good results from having a sense of meaning and purpose and belief that you're loved and all these big picture ideas.
Oh, there's thousands of peer review articles that say that a strong spiritual core is protective against addiction and depression and suicidality. In a meta-analysis, a strong spiritual life, when shared, is 82% protective against completed suicide, which is the greatest epidemic of our time. Gen Z is more likely to die by suicide than a car wreck right now. So who wouldn't take a little pill that was 82% protective? Yet we have the antidote. There's nothing a quarter as protective against suicide as a strong spiritual life shared.
Yeah, I also wonder about, like we were talking about France in the 1800s, or go even farther back than that. I mean, these people that are on battlefields and stuff like that, I'd imagine at some level what would even drive them to maintain any sort of resilience at that point in history was, I mean, it would have had to be in like some sort of spiritual view. Otherwise, why would you be doing what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Lisa. It's just ironic that people are willing to put all kinds of things in their body to feel better, and go to great lengths from a material reductionistic perspective, to feel better, but to explore a little bit of a faith or a spiritual pathway just is so difficult for modern secular humans. There's such a huge barrier there.
What a cruel irony.
I know.
When you frame it that way.
Right. And I think it was William James, said in his famous book, The Varieties of Religious Experience, at the very end, there's a wonderful kind of appendix or coda, because he's quite distant through much of the text around his own personal belief system. But then at the end, it becomes very clear that he is a person of faith. And he says something to the effect that the proof of, faith is in its impact on people's lives. And that is so true. And also speaks to the great limitations of scientism, which is that scientism has completely shut out the subjective perspective, the subjective human eye experience. This is what happened to me. Now, you can certainly fetishize the eye experience and our feelings, and, that also happens in our culture. But, we do need to pay homage to the subjective experience, the depths of which, science, I don't think will ever fully capture.
Part of the reason also the side to have this conversation is, I mean, you guys are coming at this from different perspectives, and I think there's different things that make up what this umbrella term that we call mental health. And so you obviously work with addiction, you're featured in The Social Dilemma and wrote Dopamine Nation. And so this whole entire epidemic of technology and what that also has been doing to our sense of mental health. And then you obviously have been a forerunner with spirituality and mental health. And then you studying the mind-gut connection. And I think there's multiple different variables. So when you guys think about the term mental health, like what comes to mind for you about what that actually means?
I think of mental health from a spiritual perspective. I think good mental health is alignment with the deeper force of life, when we can release radical control and not chase narrowly what we want, but be open to what is life showing me now. Mm-hmm. Be in a dialogue with the deeper force in life, the deeper nature of life.
I think what I would probably say, if I had to sort of distill it down, is that good mental health is adaptive coping in the face of suffering and the ability to endure suffering.
I like both your answers very much. I think of it as how can we lean into whatever that pain and suffering is that you are coming to speak with me about, and really turn it around, reverse engineer it, and use a holistic and integrated approach. So that involves whatever you need to feel emotionally better and resilient and improve your lifespan, your health span, your longevity. And so I think about it differently probably than I did when I was first in training, because as I really move through finding more approaches, which may not be, they're most certainly not curative, but they're very helpful in terms of improving alongside if someone is on a medication, if they are in a form of therapy, if they have a spiritual center, it can all be very helpful to them. So I think about it that way.
So when someone says that their mental health is not great, like what are they actually saying? Is it they don't know how to deal with their emotions? Obviously you have psychiatric disorders like an OCD or bipolar or something else, but what are they actually saying? If I could
jump in and just say that I think in the United States, the way that those questions are set up to be asked and answered is through a virtual or an actual, I don't think we have real prescription pads left anymore, but that's how our system is set up. That's the mainstream medical system is you come and talk to me. There's a sense of urgency about what you're saying. You're presenting with a symptom. It belongs to a diagnostic and statistical manual, which is not based on research. So we use that as a guideline. And I'm supposed to give you a diagnosis and offer you a prescription because that is the expectation of the person coming in. And for the most part, certainly in mental health, psychiatrists, even though we train to do therapy and many of my colleagues are even analysts, the main emphasis is to write a prescription. If you're in a hospital-based system, that's how visits are set up. That's how visits are reimbursed. That's how the hospitals make money. So it's an unfortunate thing because that is typical. I mean, I don't agree with it, but it is typical of what the expectation is. So I think the question that someone is coming in with is that they've reached a level of not being able to cope internally with whatever that feeling state might be. Maybe could be any one of the symptoms or diagnoses that you mentioned. But I feel like in that way, the medical system is not appropriately set up because it is not serving mental health.
Journal of Clinical Psychiatry reported a few years ago that over half of people receiving SSRIs did not meet diagnosis for any form of depression, and over a third of people met no diagnosis, mental health speaking, at all. So the notion that let's get rid of the suffering right now, I mean, suffering hurts. I understand the impulse. And at the same time, suffering is an opportunity for depth, for growth, for existential probing. Really, in my view, the brain is wired for awakening through suffering. That's what we've seen in long-term clinical course studies. The very same people who are very spiritual today, if you back them up 2.5 years, the very same people who are spiritual today, if you look at them over the past decade, are 2.5 times more likely to have suffered from a depression. And yet have informed a strong spiritual lens, a deep spiritual life, are prospectively 75% protected against a recurrence. And that goes to 90% when they're otherwise at high risk based on genes and environment. We have an antidote within us. We are built to deepen and awaken through the double door of suffering. It's just a really loud bang at the door.
If I could add something you said there, because I do think that it is the opportunity, but I also feel like the unfortunate thing that the statistic showed is there's this eagerness to prescribe and an eagerness to receive a medication. And I'm not saying that with judgment. I think it's the way the medical system is set up. I think that if someone's suffering, they want some help, and usually the doctor the clinician will prescribe something. But the other piece is that when you do get that prescription, even though it doesn't work for the symptom you're coming in for, it does cause a sense of numbness. And people will report this all the time. You know, I just don't have, I feel numb. My emotions feel numbed. They feel dulled. Friends and family will report this back as almost a side effect of that medication. So it's a very unfortunate thing. And I really wish we could do better with that.
I'm sort of dovetailing on what you both have said and your original question there. You know, I don't think that suffering itself is mental illness. It's really when people see no purpose to their suffering. I think that's the huge difference, because a lot of people suffer and we're actually really good at pain. But if we don't feel that there's any purpose or meaning to our pain, I think that is intolerable. But if we feel like the pain has purpose and meaning and we're driving towards something, then it takes on a whole new, hue or lens.
And that it's deeply beautiful. And I think about the profound notion of dark night of the soul.
Yes.
That there's actually a godly invitation in suffering to move towards our higher power.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, really interesting because as you were talking, remind me probably about 10 years ago, 12 years ago. I mean, I didn't even know what was going on with me, but I went to a psychiatrist, and within 10 minutes, like legitimately, like within 10 minutes, it was just like, okay, symptoms up. All right. Okay. And then here's the thing. And so it's like this model of medication has been proposed as this kind of antidote to mental health, and that whatever feelings you have, we're going to give you a pill for that, potentially, and not even sort through the feelings that you have. I mean, what do you guys feel like about that model in general in America?
I'm not against medication, but I don't think it should foreclose the opportunity to do the deeper work. And I know a great number of people who started medications in their 20s and in their 40s and 50s are still on the medications. And in their path, it appears to have foreclosed the more probing work that could have led to an awakening to a bigger self, a deeper sense of life. Depression has, your humanities major, deep roots in the human journey as an invitation, as a profound thread, a golden thread in who we are, not to hang ourselves by, but to follow and see where it leads.
Yeah, because you said numbing, and you've written extensively about numbing, and it's like part of the rise of technology with social media and dopamine and all these things in kind of a maladaptive way. There's just there's a numbing of anything that is uncomfortable. And when I sit and I think about, how The Social Dilemma came out like 5 years ago, and it was this big documentary, 100 million people ended up watching it. And I mean, if you think about it in terms of like an addict, and the numbing aspect, it's like, well, if someone's addicted to heroin or cocaine, if you tell them it's not good for them, then is that gonna make a big dent? And so, I mean, I just, even on the subway here, you see people on their phones, and so any sort of distress, there's like a numbing, a distraction, and there's like a wide variety of pills and things that you could use, porn or food, and so I just feel like there's so much to numb ourselves today. I don't know what you guys think about that.
Well, for sure. I mean, I think there are a gazillion things to, numb ourselves. And I never cease to be amazed by how much we want to avoid the world and the present moment. It's so bizarre. Like, why is it so hard for us to be present and to be connected with the people and the world around us? And yet we're constantly looking for ways to avoid it. It's really fascinating. Going back a little bit though to the study of medication, I mean, I've written a book actually called Drug Dealer MD. So, I've written a lot about this topic in my early days, because what I saw in psychiatry is like people weren't even allowed to be sad. And in fact, in 2022, they added grief disorder, where if someone that you love died and you were sad for too long, you were mentally ill. But they won't put social media addiction into the DSM. So there you go. But at the same time, I really don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater, because I do think that the medications for people who are in acute crisis can be an opportunity to experience a new way of being in the world. And if you talked earlier about this ripple of anxiety, and I really like that image, this kind of sense that it's kind of rippling through everything that we do. I think that's so true, including our pets. Maybe pets are anxious because their owners are anxious. I don't know.
I don't know which one.
Yeah,
which it is.
Which it
it's
is.
mirroring. Yeah.
But the medications can be helpful for giving people kind of a new sense of, for example, what it is like to go through a day without constant, intolerable anxiety. And having gained that awareness, they can then potentially go off the medications and do the work, or, find the work to get back to that place. So it's like you've been to a place and now you kind of have a sense of what you want to get back to. So I guess that's kind of the middle road, Of course, there is, it's the severe mental illness, and I'm so grateful for psychiatric medications when they work to treat severe mental illness. But even outside of that severe mental illness, the sort of the worried well, or just this ripple of anxiety, I think there's potential utility there, just like there's probably potential utility with psychedelics and spiritual awakening. I've talked to too many people who have had a profound spiritual awakening with exposure to psychedelics to dismiss it entirely. But it's all about sort of how we use it, how much, how long, and whether or not we are integrating it with the other things that we need to do to be healthy in the long run.
When I talk to people who've had an authentic awakening through psychedelics, the conversation very quickly becomes, is there a difference between a drug-induced experience and a fully integrated spiritual life? And here I raise what the Army uses, which is the 4 Ps. You have a practice, people, a path, and purpose.
I didn't know the Army used that. Can you say that again?
Yeah, the Army
Love that.
is foundationally, George Marshall talked about this, a foundationally spiritual organization.
Yes.
And the Army supports the spiritual core in soldier formation.
Yeah.
Quite
Really
deliberately
cool.
and extensively.
Really cool.
The 4 Ps in the Army are your practice through which you reach your higher power.
Yeah.
Your practice, your people with whom you share the practice, the path, and your purpose.
Neat. Yeah, as you know, I have a daughter who's a cadet at West Point, and she has found all of those things, and it's really enriched her life. And there's such a strong sense of community among cadets at West Point, I think, because of this kind of inherent spiritual pathway. But I'm curious about that, so I'm going to want to read more.
How do you feel like we should frame emotion then?
If the so-called system is set up to create sort of instant gratification, so I'll just go back to that point because I think it was very, very much a turning point in my career very early on when I was I really wanted to do some community-based work and see how I could use nutrition as part of the treatment plan, not as the only thing, obviously. And I was cited at some point for not prescribing enough, and it was the lever that caused me to not only move. When I work in big hospitals, so I was able to move from the community center to a different part where I could do more of my own thing, because it taught me that if I'm going to be told, you're not productive enough, why am I not productive? Because I'm not generating enough billing through prescriptions I'm writing to make me productive enough for those visits to count. But if I was speaking to the person, offering them other solutions, including spirituality, a community church group, other community resources that exist in that community, food, nutrition as well, and came to the conclusion that the person was young or whatever age they were actually, and didn't need a prescription, that was going to count against me. And I was like, I remember speaking to a late uncle about that, and he said, you don't belong in that system. And you should figure out a way, because it's creating a moral dilemma for you. Like, why do I need to prescribe that? And if the person genuinely, based on my training, and I'm not assuming to know everything, didn't need that prescription, that actually caused me to leave and move to eventually open my own clinic within the hospital and with the support of my chair. And I didn't have an open conversation about this with them. I just internally knew that struck a chord for me. And being someone who doesn't like to fail, that was probably something. So I wasn't failing, but it was like being told you're not productive enough. And I'm like, I'm coming here and working hard. So how does that add up? But I look back and I'm very grateful it happened, because it pushed me in the direction I meant to go.
So do you feel like the medical system is invested in actually helping someone heal, grow in their mental health? Or are you saying you just feel like, or is it just like a money machine in a sense?
I'm not trying to imply it's only a money machine. I think there are lots of good clinicians doing lots of very hard work in the world, but I do think there's an element of how the medical system is set up in our hospitals, if you are a hospital-based practitioner, that is definitely related to insurance billing, and insurance billing is related to prescriptions. Procedures, surgeries, all of that as well. So that's one component of it for sure.
So we started the Spirituality Mind Body Institute to change this, and we're raising a new cohort of mental health providers who have a foundationally spiritual view of human suffering, who are trained to understand suffering as a knock at the door to a spiritual awakening, and who have themselves, perhaps the best form of training available, walked the dark night of the soul to an awakening.
I was just going to get back to your question about emotion. and kind of the role of emotion. And I think this relates to the idea of scientism again, and how scientism hasn't really left any room for emotion, or very little room, such that it's leaking out on the sides in all kinds of weird ways where people don't allow their emotions to surface enough to inform their life decisions. And like, if you look at, the brain and the oldest parts of the brain that have evolved over the longest period of time, it's those deep emotion centers, and they're absolutely vital for good decision making. You cannot make a good, wise, or informed decision if you are not also integrating your emotion brain. And yet we often leave that behind. I think as a result, we're seeing a lot of individual and societal harm where people have sort of bubbling over of these untamed, unaware emotions that they really don't know what to do with. So I do think, bringing that back in, that's a lot of the work that we do in psychotherapy, right? Kind of helping people understand their emotions, name their emotions, integrate their emotions. But I would say, more broadly, I don't think that's happening. I mean, there is more work in that area for sure. And like, there's a whole social emotional learning in elementary schools that is a good thing. But I still think in general, there's just this sort of like the weight of, must be kind of like a computer, robotic, what is the evidence, blah, blah, blah. And, as you said earlier, like, so much of the evidence is flawed. So it's not even just that there are a lot of important questions that scientism can't answer. It's also that a lot of the science out there you can't trust.
Yeah, I mean, when someone's in the depths of it, it's really, really difficult to experience some emotions. Like, in the course of my life, I've had like 2 mental breakdowns, and I think I've shared this with you a little bit, but in both instances, it literally just feels like you have a demon running around in your head, and the mere presence of those emotions can feel so terrifying, coupled with kind of racing thoughts and other things, that it's like the only instinctual thing you could do in the moment of like, what can I do to make this stop? Because I just can't handle it. And so I have a tremendous amount of sympathy for that. And then any potential role like medication could provide, I think when you're in the moment, it's one thing, but then I guess you got to step back and look at life as a whole and kind of make some evaluations when you're in a moment like that. But I don't know. I have a lot of sympathy for people who go through those things. I mean, and this kind of bleeds into, there's these different forms of suffering as well. I mean, you have like OCD, you have bipolar, you have people that have schizophrenia, and then clinical depression. Do you guys look at these sorts of diagnoses as similar or related, or you look at them as kind of like a different beast that you would tackle as you kind of go through the mental health conversation?
There's tremendous heterogeneity around affective disorders, but even within what we call depression, and even within what we call MDD, major depression, there is tremendous heterogeneity, really representing subtypes. Mm-hmm. So the very people who framed the DSM wrote an excellent article on the fact that if 2 people, excellent trained providers, greet a patient independently who has schizophrenia, they agree 0.9. But if they meet a patient who has depression, they agree 0.28, which is to say that there is no singular depression. There are depressions. And they have different pathways, perhaps different ways through. And how you get into the hole doesn't need to be the only way you get out of the hole.
I went to medical school and did my psychiatry residency in the 1990s, which was the decade of the brain. And that was a time when we were taught that each of these different mental illnesses was located in a specific part of the brain, that there was a chemical imbalance or faulty wiring in that specific part that manifested in this specific way. And, that's one way to organize things. And that's what the DSM is founded on. And that can be useful because we do need some kind of framework, even if only to have a common language. But I have come to believe over my career that most of what we diagnose as mental illness is really a mismatch between our unique and ancient wiring and the world that we live in now. And that explains then why, from an evolutionary perspective, we're not just sort of, those will never die out. So bipolar disorder is a great example. In my experience, you will never meet someone calmer in crisis than someone with bipolar disorder.
Really?
That's my experience. There's no evidence for this, but that's except for my clinical experience. And so I think that Mother Nature has preserved whatever that is that makes people vulnerable in that way when they're not in crisis, because in crisis, those people will be very necessary for our group survival. Addiction's another great example. Like when you think like back in ancient times where, moving together as a tribe, barely surviving, trying to get a little bit of food and a little bit of water to make it to the next day. And you have people who are wired to give it all up, whatever it takes to get that food and get that water. Those are your future day addicts, right? Because who's willing to go that far and work that hard? Who's that tenacious, right? Even schizophrenia, I mean, if you just look historically, in many cultures still, but historically, many people who we now today diagnose with schizophrenia in other cultures in older times were shamans, right? These were people for whom the veil between this world and another world was very thin, and they were holy people. They weren't kind of, lumped over here as people who were ill. So I think when you look at it that way, it sort of opens up the paradigm and it gives people room to sort of say, hey, what's good about what my brain does? Because, it's not all bad. And that's true for almost every patient that I've worked with, that their particular vulnerability is also their strength if you can just find it.
It's like I'm so sorry. It's sort of like when you see someone in a full-blown manic episode on an inpatient unit, and they are their most, there's some things that are flipping over onto very symptomatic, but they're also sometimes the most creative at that time. And they will literally tell you, once they've had medications on a safer place, in terms of their mood cycle, will say, you've taken away my creativity. And because they can see, I remember this patient, a few patients like this very clearly, their artwork was still in the room. And they looked at it and it was such profound sadness actually to feel that. But at the same time, while in that state, they were also doing very dangerous things. So it wasn't, if it was just the artwork, that would be great. It was also very dangerous something. And that's where, between something you said as well as, and that in terms of your own experience and something that you mentioned, that medications do provide, they are that net. They are important, because individuals will come through a period of suffering, whatever we want to call it, and be at a point where they can integrate other things and improve. So they do serve a purpose. I feel very strongly about that. They serve a purpose, and they've saved the lives of many of my patients. But there are also these not so great things, But.
So it seems like what you're saying, that these conditions always existed, I guess, in some form.
That's right. I think, again, this is our unique inter-individual variability that hasn't died out, in the species because it remains useful, so that we can adapt to very different types of conditions that may present themselves.
Does that mean at some level we have pathologized, like just normal suffering or emotions or things like that? Or there's value in the DSM, there's value in sort of categorizing these different sorts of things?
Yes and yes. I'll just jump in there. Yes and yes. We definitely pathologized everyday life, but there's also value in categories to try to make sense of things.
I think to something you said earlier, it sort of creates, DSM provides a structured framework from which we can mutually work and use that framework so that there aren't 100 different conversations happening about, say, a mental health diagnosis or whatever the person is presenting with. So I agree, it's also both. But I also think about something you said, because if you think about X number of years ago, centuries ago, and how something called a malaise was treated. This is depicted in novels and movies and that type of thing. A young woman who's not feeling good, she might have actually had teenage or young adult depression. Mm-hmm. But, the mom, the aunts will take her on a cruise, on a ship across to London, or send her to, I remember this from a novel, send her to Newport to spend time with the family in the summer. But when you think about what was happening, they were changing her environment. They were, she was having more sunshine in an age when there was no sunblock or sunscreen. So the vitamin D was actually reaching her skin. And she might have gotten some benefit from that. But also, seeing cousins or seeing other members of the family, she wasn't alone. It's just a different framework of how they dealt with it. Now, in this day and age, that same young woman or man or male or whoever it was would be like you, within 10 minutes getting an SSRI or whatever the prescription was if they went to a doctor's visit. So I think the DSM needs to be there to offer a framework that is uniform across, certainly for prescribers in the US. But I also think, and elsewhere, but I also think there are different perspectives of how to help people.
Yeah, because when I think about these components of what it was like to grieve or suffer, I mean, we're much more exposed to death centuries ago. And then, we had a much more spiritually connected life. But then even when I think about your work, our food system and our food supply, I mean, you wrote a whole book on this. If certain foods can help remedy certain mental health conditions, is it possible to just go off of it? Have we gotten away from that in a sense of like with our food supply that a lot of these conditions could have been helped through natural means, through food, but now we have these forms of pills that are taking that place?
I don't think I can speak to the past, but what I think I can speak to is the here and now, and what can we do about the dilemma we're in. Because I feel that food, nutrients, nutrition, and even supplements is a place for them too. For many of us may have deficiencies that are just not covered by the nutrition that we're eating. I don't think we can undo what's happened in the industrialization of our crops, right? We're here now, and that's what most people are eating. Where I feel we can make a difference is around education and what we know and what we can tell people about the power of food as medicine alongside whatever else they might be doing, including medication and therapy and other things. But I also feel that while we can't undo what's happened, how do we move ourselves forward? And that's a pivot point. How do we clean up what we're eating? How do we improve? And it doesn't have to be perfect. I've always believed in an 80-20 rule. No one is a perfect eater. So it's what can we do to help ourselves feel better? Because those pillars can be very, very powerful to help whatever else you're doing. And I think that I don't think we'll ever be at a point of curing, but I think there's a building evidence base around being more powerful than people realize, especially with the gut microbiome research. And, there's this very recent study that came out around, that I think was just published, around depression and soda. Now, for those maybe slightly more informed, drinking soda probably, might end up happy in that moment, but over time it's not going to be great for you. But they were able to actually look at women and the type of bacteria that were higher in women to worsen the depression. And it's just about to be published. And so I think that's very exciting to me, because a lot of people would argue, soda makes me feel great and it's all good. But more informed people would say, it's probably not the best thing for anything you're doing. And once in a while, if you have a soda, that's okay, but it shouldn't be your staple. But the fact that we're moving in that direction and being able to identify that, I think is cool.
Uma, would you say the relationship is bidirectional or one directional? In other words, if someone is depressed, are we altering our gut biome?
So there's the way we understand it is that if someone is depressed, could be different factors that's altering the gut microbiome. It could be some of the level of stress they're experiencing, some of the food that they're eating, because they're not usually eating the healthiest if they're not feeling good, or they're not eating at all, right? So they could be eating too much and the wrong types of foods. I usually say, people are not usually rushing out to buy the broccoli. So it's usually not that they're...
What are they
not the
eating?
broccoli.
Ice cream, candy?
Something usually it's a lot of stress, eating a lot of comfort foods. And comfort foods are discomfort for the brain. So that's a gross generalization because not everyone is in that category. Some people stop eating and they lose weight and they become, they really need help. Because
A comfort food is like a sweet roll?
it's usually, in my experience and the people I've worked with, comfort foods are usually ice cream, candy, cookies, the foods that are hyperpalatable, that tap into our cravings, that, hit our dopamine circuits, that make us want more, and usually are not the healthiest for our brain, body level of anxiety, and certainly depression. So I do think there's an element that's bidirectional, but I feel like when you're not feeling well, some of what may be affecting you is how you're eating that's impacting the microbes. But we also know that emotions themselves affect the microbes. So it's more complex. But I think the research is exciting. I'm hoping we reach a point where...
I'm wondering, because is it possible then you could enter on either side of that equation? You could treat the biome and treat the mood. Yeah.
Psychobiotics are looking at that, manipulating the way that we use food to improve the microbiome. Because studies have shown things like a comparison of an SSRI, I think they looked at Prozac versus a probiotic. And the fact that the probiotic was as a supplement, so not necessarily a yogurt, a plain yogurt or something like that. And they showed that the probiotic was better for improving mood. So we have elements like that have been studied. And I think it's one of the powerful ways that we can help.
See, here at the cutting edge of research, I think the DSM becomes helpful because there are many roads to Rome. And it can be that a change in diet alters that very same diagnosis of depression from the DSM. And so too, we know that when people grow spiritually, they gain enormous protective benefit against recurrence of depression. So True. DSM can be helpful as a marker, and we then can get to a place of decreased risk for depression in many ways.
I think that, things like the scales we use that have been validated for depression, for anxiety, and the structure of DSM just as not only providing guidance, but making it more uniform across psychiatric practice, is very, very important. One of the ways we would test to see that someone was improving is by the validated scales to see, if they are eating broccoli and improve their diet and lifestyle, are they starting to feel better? They may say they're feeling better, but on the scales, are they improving as well?
Uma, my doctor gave me broccoli crushed up in a pill. What do you think of that?
So...
Did your doctor really do that?
Yes. It's broccoli essence in a pill.
Okay.
That's an interesting doctor.
What do you think?
Like to talk about. So this brings in the question of how we get our nutrition right. We know the reason that I feel supplements do play a role in our lives in the United States is that our food system is what it is. The marketing of foods is what it is. And that we are eating in a way that's not perfect. And so some of us in the Northeast may be vitamin D deficient. Some of us may need more leafy greens. Some of us may need something. Personally, I don't think broccoli needs to be in a pill. I'll just say that because I think there's an easy way to eat lots of salads, enough servings of broccoli, unless you really hate it and you just can't stand the sight of it, then maybe a pill is for you. But I do think we can get a lot of that from the food system and then fill the gaps after some blood tests or whatever testing is needed to prove. So, it's a test, don't guess kind of thing. Don't just go take a bunch of supplements because you think you're deficient. Make sure you understand what that is, because it's very nuanced, and it's important to make sure that, your doctor knows what you're taking and it doesn't interfere with other medications.
May I ask you a creative question?
Yes, please.
If we are deeply aligned spiritually, will we naturally incur a diet that is healthier for us? So, for instance, if we don't want to harm fellow living beings, or is there a way in which a spiritual perspective will naturally garner a healthier diet?
What I can say, and I haven't looked up the research on the question, but I think it's a great one, so I want to be able to offer perspective. I feel that people who are in touch spiritually are aligned more internally. And like Sadhguru talks about this program on inner engineering, and it's actually pretty powerful because it sort of teaches you a method of how you think about yourself from the inside. And I think that there's something about being more spiritual aligned which leads to not so much what type of food, but making a better choice for yourself, because your mind is in a different place, and you are, if you have a spiritual practice, you're grounded in a certain way, and you're going to naturally just make choices that are probably better for your body. Certainly that's been my clinical experience, but I've not looked at the exact research on that.
Yeah, I mean, if these things can help with your mental health, I mean, it begs the question, can you just replace medicine with food?
So I've recently been speaking to a company that is doing some very interesting work. And what I'm going to be helping them with is the lifestyle and nutrition pillar, because they are helping people safely de-prescribe from medications under the guidance of trained physicians, psychiatrists specifically. And the reason I wanted to support what they're doing is they offer an opportunity for safe evaluation of someone when a person has been on medication for, say, 10 years, not felt better, or whatever the circumstance, that circumstance is evaluated before they do anything. So I think that is, in a way, to answer your question. I feel like there are these newer models of care that are evolving. And the company, Outro Health, is really helping people in that way. And they're small and growing. But what I want to be able to do is really teach and help the providers learn the nutrition and lifestyle components that they can use alongside someone who is safely being, and that they're not going to experience withdrawal, and hopefully come off and have real tools in their toolkit that may work for them. There may be others that they decide cannot be tapered off medication. But they actually don't call it tapering, they call it de-prescribing, and I think it's an interesting model. And I feel like if we had a little bit more of an outlook like that, we might be able to help more people in a different way. So people can stay on the medications and others can get safe help.
Yeah. I mean, we were talking a little bit about your book, Drug Dealer, and I mean, it's interesting if there's these kind of natural remedies for people living in a capitalistic society. I mean, you don't have to be all or nothing about it. You could have some medication, you could have food as well, but living in a capitalistic society, it does raise like the ethical questions of what does it mean that a pharmaceutical company is trading on the NASDAQ 500? So it's like there are interests, shareholder interests in making as much profit. So there's benefit to more prescriptions being held out because it means more money. It means happier shareholders. And I don't know if we're like an ethical quandary with this conversation in America.
I mean, it's just the way our healthcare system is set up, deeply embedded in our capitalist economy. It's just who we are. And the fundamental problem with it is that the longer people remain sick, the more profit that's made, right? And this is really where you're seeing this huge and growing movement or, a rejection of mainstream Western medicine, because people begin to suspect that these treatments are not actually necessarily designed for wellness, because the system isn't necessarily designed for wellness. Does that make sense? Like if I treat a patient and they get better, then they don't come back, and then I don't, not me personally, but the system is not profiting. Now, a lot of people, including our lawmakers, are aware of this, and many public policy folks have made many good efforts to try to remedy this problem using things like bundled care or capitated healthcare system. You have like the Kaiser model, which is a very good model where you pay an annual fee, you don't pay per service encounter, right? Trying to get at sort of like the wellness model rather than the staying sick model. But nonetheless, it's hard to get away from the for-profit mentality. Even frankly, in the realm of supplements or deprescribing. I write in Drug Dealer MD, which was published in 2016, about the need for deprescribing clinics, because doctors get a lot of training on how to get folks on medicine, almost no training on how to get them off. And so it's always great to hear about new ventures. But again, every new venture, you can want to help people. What is it? Effective altruism, and also be making a profit, because the for-profit motive is fundamentally there. But I wanted to go someplace else with this. First of all, totally agree that we have a drugified food system. Food has been made addictive, right, with the addition of salt, fat, sugar, flavorants. That means once we start eating, it's difficult to stop, because not only are we getting the calories we need, we're also triggering our dopamine reward pathway, which then just tells us, keep going, eat as much as you possibly can, because you don't know when you're going to get it again. Of course, in the world we live in now, we have it everywhere. And any addiction, including a food addiction, an ultra-processed food addiction, can lead to depression, anxiety, and other mental health harms. So it's really awesome to hear about data showing, for example, not only that drinking a lot of soda can make you depressed, but even better, that cutting back on the soda that you're drinking can make you less depressed, right? Which is what we see when people do a dopamine fast or abstain for a period of time from their drug of choice. First, they feel worse as they're in withdrawal. The universal symptoms of withdrawal are psychological symptoms like anxiety, depression, irritability. The longer they can go, they ultimately get to a place where they're actually feeling better, not just better than they were in withdrawal, but better than they have for a very long time. But what I really want to talk about is the way in which our orientation on food today is almost a defense against spirituality, in the sense that we all now eat our own specialized foods, maybe in pill form, right? And we eat at all these different times. And we've gotten so far away from, like, food is this communal experience where we're preparing it together. We're eating it together. We're all eating the same thing, right? It's hard now to host because people come and they're not hungry because they have their unique, right? People aren't hungry, or they're over hungry because they've been fasting for 3 days and they, eat it all. Or everybody's, you got the gluten-free, you got the vegans, the partial vegan. I mean, it's really tough. Like, food has become this bizarre thing that no longer really brings us together. But instead, we are all up in our own heads using food in this very kind of regimented, obsessional way that gives our lives a structure, right? And in almost a weird kind of meaning, but is also really this huge defense against having to think about other things related to, our existential being.
May I ask you a question?
Yeah.
As you know, there was a letter written from Carl Jung to Bill Wilson,
yes,
the founder of AA, in which Jung proposed that the very same deep faculty through which we seek God, the higher power, is the same faculty that gets kicked and ignited through the tricky back door of substance use. What's your view of that?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with that. And I think that dovetails with your commentary earlier on sort of the broader problem about spiritual atrophy in our world today. Yeah, people are looking for and finding false forms of worship whether through food or, some kind of addictive substance or behavior or, a baseball team or a football team. Again, this is not to say that any of that is necessarily bad in and of itself, but you can see the deep need and desire for worship. And it's coming out in kind of bizarre ways because we've lost the fabric of, a kind of a communal worship and a shared faith.
I think that some of what we are living through is the fact that we practice defensive medicine versus preventive, and I think that some of the crying out from the public or people who are just trying to do a little bit more of an integrated model of care or seek practitioners who can offer them more than just a prescription is speaking to, can we do this differently? Like, I think we're too deep in. I don't think we can change the food system now, but I do feel we can change who we are and the choices we make. And that doesn't have to be perfect. It can just be a little bit better than what we are doing right now to move in the direction of healthfulness. And I feel like that goes for spirituality as well, because not everyone is harnessing. I grew up, I was a preschool dropout. I think I mentioned that to you. I refused to go to, I don't know how I got away with it. But my parents would leave, therefore, because I was having too much fun with my maternal grandmother.
Oh, that's lovely.
I dedicated my first book to her because that's really my love of food, and just a lot of things came from her. But I would hang out with my grandparents and they would find ways to entertain me. That's how I learned meditation, and that's how I learned yoga as a child, because I was a preschool dropout. So all of those things happened. I was fortunate to have that and happen naturally, but not everyone comes in with that kind of guidance around a spiritual center or people in your family that are that way. I was thinking about something you said regarding food. I was thinking about how there are parts of the country where people get together after church and they bring food together. They have, that sense of community. They each participate in some sort of gathering on a Sunday, depending on the time, a lunch or an evening. And, some of the work in the Blue Zone speaks to that sense of community, having your tribe, eating together, walking, just naturally being outdoors. So I feel like, is there a way for us to just move the needle a little bit in all these different directions while not seeking being perfect, but seeking being a healthier nation? And what can we do in that way?
I was surprised to hear you say that you don't think we can change our food supply.
So the reason I say that is my view, and it is that when we went through the industrialization of crops and we started treating our crops, and have continued to, except in certain, even a food that is organic, non-GMO, may still have a tiny bit of pesticide in it, right? It's not perfect. I haven't figured out, and I would love to hear more solutions, how we can walk back from that in a country where the food is produced, grown, or even if we're importing things. I don't know how we can take the entire ecosystem, is what I mean, and change that. What I do feel we can change is how we vote with our dollars, meaning where we buy our food, what we buy, and what choices we make. This is why every time I see a dollar store, I will try, if I have time, stop and walk in and see if they have what canned foods they have. I'm not looking at the candy and cookie aisle, but I'm looking to see, can someone get canned sardines, canned tuna, even canned chicken or canned salmon, which one of my favorites is. Then a person can get something that is brain healthy, that is within budget. It's no longer $1. It's $1.25, I believe, but still, in other words, what can they do that is affordable, that is a real life solution for them? And I think that those things are also important. And that's all I meant, that I don't know how we can reverse the process of industrialization of our crops and what we've done with food in this country, which was in fact also trying to create an answer to the growing population. Right. So, that's why I feel it's a dilemma.
I'm thinking of your question about how we enter the door spiritually. Mm-hmm. And Your story, I think, holds a key to the kingdom, which was you were close with your grandmother. In the blue zones, the number one predictor, actually, of longevity was a deep relationship with elders. Elders are the keeper of wisdom.
That's right. It's that the many generations, that intergenerational relationship is hugely important. Absolutely right.
Yeah, I mean the communal experience, familial experience, all of those things I think is interesting. I mean, you were alluding to it by inviting people over. But we had a friend over like a month and a half ago, and we made dinner, and they were surprised, like, there's not an experience that actually happens in today's world. I think there's an intersection with that of sitting down at a table with people, feeling like you have your tribe. And I think part of the downside to the rise of big city living and all of that is the fact that we don't live generally close to our families anymore. We don't feel like we have community and people that we could run to that would even care in a moment. And because there's so much transience in a lot of big cities in particular, you might form a relationship with someone and then they leave like 2 years later. And so it feels like a revolving door of friendships and relationships that you have with people. And so your form of connectedness in today, not just to the divine, but then to other people, is also radically different.
I love lane roots. I agree with that. I've had one house, one spouse, one job my whole life. From there comes an adventure. So I agree that lane roots is wonderful. I have seen the transience of being rooted in New York. People I adore moving. Yes, we stay in touch, but it's not the same as 30 years ago.
What I think is interesting is the way that digital media and social media has not just allowed, but even encouraged people to stay connected online, which both abets the problem of our nomadic existence, but also aids that problem, right? It's because we can stay connected online that we are more likely to be transient, to move here and there. So I think, again, just thinking about all these things as sort of double-edged swords is really important. Plus, the greater problem that the more we can meet our intellectual, emotional, sexual needs with something that appears on a screen, the less we have to turn to each other to do that. And then you have this growing growing disintegration, progressive disintegration of, these close social bonds. For example, in the United States, more people live alone than ever before. Like we could never have lived alone in prior generations. We're far too social for that. Even the most antisocial among us is social. We needed to be together, but now we can do that because we're doing, the screen thing. So it's interesting times.
It speaks to that loneliness sort of epidemic that people are speaking about across all age groups. I think it's probably more profound in some younger folk, but I think it's across all age groups. And it makes me think of a study that was done in Mass General in the neuroimaging division, where during COVID, they looked at the MRI of brains of individuals who had not had a COVID infection. And they noticed that the brains of those individuals on MRI scans showed neuroinflammation. And the one thought about why that had happened, and because these individuals were infection-free, was the social isolation, social distancing, and what we had to do to survive COVID. I thought that was fascinating because it sort of showed, it spoke to the fact that I still encourage individuals that I see to have even Zoom dinners with friends and family if they live alone, just to connect on, or FaceTime, whatever works for them, because that connection is so important, because people get so hugely isolated and it doesn't help their mood or their anxiety.
That's such a nice example of using tech or social media
in a positive way
to bring you into direct human contact.
Right. If you can't be with your mom or be with whoever.
Another example of that is I know so many young couples who met through a dating app.
Yes.
And then now they're getting married.
Yes.
So when social media is your assistant towards finding direct human contact, it can open doors.
Yeah.
I don't know many people in longstanding marriages who 30 years ago met through a dating app. But now there's people who you would have never met otherwise. They are not just a friend of a friend. And these are such interesting couples who come from different sides of the earth, who have come from different backgrounds. I feel like Gen Z has stripped themselves of the outward markers that limit us from getting to know people. And they're connecting at the heart. They're connecting at the deepest level of consciousness. And they're aware of being one world. Gen Z is aware that they're one world.
What sorts of ways would you advise people to go about that community conversation as it relates to the mental health and even the decisions that they would make for their life? Because you need people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just getting back to food, I encourage people to eat the same food at the same time, to get hungry together, to make that food together, and to eat the same food. I just think that's really powerful, and it's a simple thing, and we underestimate it. To your point about sort of slowing it down, I have this wonderful friend and colleague who talks about her meditation and prayer practice, allowing her to slow down to the pace of mindfulness, which I just think is such a wonderful. So yeah, kind of slowing it down to the pace of mindfulness and doing these sort of ancient things like eating together. I just think we need more of that kind of thing.
And talking.
Yeah, talking.
Having a conversation. Yeah. Not having your phones on the table.
Right.
Actually speaking.
Now, one of the other big pillars of this that I had mentioned off the top, we talked a lot about medication, but then therapy in general. And I think this is another area of confusion for people. You could be in therapy for a really long time, not make any sort of progress. It's like I went in and then talking about my parents, and then 20 years later, I'm still talking about my parents, and I haven't made any progress. And so, what do you think the pros and the cons of modern day therapy, and what role does it play in helping us with our mental health?
Well, I've talked a lot about how therapy done badly leads to victim blaming and kind of circling the drain on perceived traumas and doesn't help people actually move forward in their lives, but instead demonizes others, fixates blame on them for everything that's wrong, and doesn't really properly give people tools for moving forward. But therapy well done doesn't do that. And really allows people to metabolize past experiences, which is important because when we are children, our brains are more plastic than at any point in life. The coping strategies and the things we learn about the world and other people when we're young entrench themselves in our brains and become our kind of fallback, go-to mechanisms, even when those strategies are no longer adaptive. So we have to become aware of them. But there has to be this sense of agency, of responsibility, of giving back. One of the exciting evolutions in the world of psychotherapy, and just to broadly characterize the evolution of psychotherapy, sometimes, this is not my words. I can't remember who to attribute this to, but it started with the devil made me do it, then moved to my mother made me do it, then my brain made me do it, and now it's AI made me do it. But anyway, but when you look at psychotherapy, it really started with psychoanalysis, right? And Freud's revolutionary notion that the things that happen to us in our childhood can play out and cause adult psychopathology, even if it's unconscious. So that was Freud's huge contribution. Not just Freud, but many others who lived during that time, his acolytes and others. And the idea and the discovery was really that by taking our memories and experiences and putting them into words, creating a personal narrative, we could make sense of them. And having done that, could make better decisions going forward. And the mode of psychotherapy, that Freud came up with was this very interesting, very what is now, difficult to find, where the therapist sits behind the individual lying on the couch and says almost nothing, creating anxiety in the analysand or the patient or the client, however, such that anxiety then leads toward discoveries of uncovered material that then come into awareness. And so it's a rather, it's an interpersonal process, but there's this element of mystery, and there's definitely not a kind of a rescue of the analyst, right? They're letting this person kind of out there uncomfortable, trying to figure it out. That has given way toward a very different mode of psychotherapy we have now, where therapists are much more interactive. There are a lot of protocols, like cognitive behavioral therapy protocols, that follow very specific, again, frameworks to kind of help people. But importantly, the bigger difference is that the therapist is extremely interactive and also importantly, very validating. This idea that we have to validate the patient's emotions, experiences. And that is important for creating that therapeutic alliance. But I think we've taken that too far, where now we think that empathy is sort of all you need, to get better. And yeah, I mean, that, and empathy, if you think about empathy in the context of a capitalist system, you're probably going to keep people coming back if all you do is empathize. It's the way people can't stop using ChatGPT and other large language models. So validating, so empathic, makes me feel so justified, in my worldview. But that is not healing, right? Healing is, it may start with empathy, and almost always has to start with empathy to create the alliance, but it has to ultimately give way toward, hey, what is your contribution to this problem? Or what can you be doing differently to help yourself and other people? And furthermore, what part of your suffering is actually probably never going to change? That I can't take it away and you can't take it away, and you need to, how are you going to hold that pain, right? And so we're seeing more therapies like ACT, acceptance commitment therapy, which I love ACT because ACT is basically secular 12-step or secular religion. It's like, we're not going to talk about God, but we're going to do the whole God thing where we say, you know what? No one can take away your problems. Nope. You just got to accept what is. And then you have to commit yourself to a values-based life. That's spirituality, right? But we can't really do that. We can't do spirituality in psychotherapy. So now we have to come up with ACT. I love ACT. It's great. I'm glad it was invented. But it really is just, as with so many things that we do and say, something old, now in green. That's an old Yiddish proverb, something old now in green. But, something old wrapped up in a kind of a new packaging, which it needs to be, because every new generation needs to hear these messages in a way that they can hear it and understand it.
I would love to know your opinion on Freud's substance abuse.
Yeah. So Freud was a highly flawed individual, and we know that very flawed individuals can end up, can put good in the world. I mean, I think Freud was also a pathological narcissist. He was intellectually greedy and vindictive. Carl Jung was his acolyte, and he was very ungenerous to other people in terms of his sense of his proprietary domain, or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, he did not only, because he wasn't the only one, who had this concept of the unconscious. It was actually that concept was quite well evolved, but he somehow translated it in a way that just obviously took off and had a massive influence on 100 years of how we think about suffering and what to do about it, which is pretty incredible. Just footnote to that, in the Gen Z psychiatry residency population, I'm seeing more and more of them now go back to psychoanalysis. Yeah. And there's a resurgence of interest. And why is that? Yeah. Because of that element of mystery and that element of having to figure it out for yourself, entering this kind of mysterious space where the therapist isn't always just saying, oh, well, in this situation, you need to do this, or you need to think this way, or
I did 2 years of Jungian psychoanalysis.
That fits.
It changed my life. It opened up the world to me. I had a dream when I was 30 that woke me up in a cold sweat. I dreamt that my father died and I had a baby. at 30. Neither was the case. It shook me to the core. And so I entered into Jungian analysis, where the deep work is the work of dreams, the symbolic reality. Why, of all nights, did this figure come into your dream? What was the shadow figure in your dream, who in time you learn to integrate so that you're whole and strong? Jungian analysis taught a relationship to life that I found tremendously empowering. It was not a stance of passive receptivity, but one of listening to the message coming through the symbolic reality, whether in a synchronicity, a dream, some form of non-causal, symbolically, ontologically real event. And from Jungian analysis, we developed spiritual awareness psychotherapy, which was spiritual awareness psychotherapy is predicated on the notion that your emotions are real. They're telling you, if you're feeling guilty, what might you be doing right now to generate guilt? So, for instance, my husband and I were in a tiff, and we were in a tiff not just for 2 days, it became a week, and it became 2 weeks. And so I took my irritation and my anger, and through the lens of spiritual awareness psychotherapy, handed it over to my higher power, who I call God. And what came back in a receptive, awakened state was an image of my husband all ruddy and healthy and happy. And I realized in that image that I'd been starving him emotionally. He looked better fed emotionally. Spiritual awareness offers us the opportunity to take the poisonous emotions, hand them over to the higher power, and see what comes back. And what comes back is guidance towards deepening greater love. It's an awakening, an opening. It's an interactive form with the universe of psychotherapy. And it's based, of course, on Jung.
Such beautiful insights that you have both offered on these different types of models of psychotherapy and psychoanalysis. I think the idea of too much empathy in our society, it's almost like socially inappropriate now to, I don't know, have any sort of accountability towards one's actions, or even to hold them to what they say that they've wanted. Why do you think the model has went so far in that direction?
I mean, empathy pays, right? So getting back to our capitalist system, that's how you keep people coming back. It feels good in the short term, even if it's not good for you, in the long term.
It also moves away from accountability.
Yeah.
Right? Because I think I think empathy is only one component, but I agree. And I also feel like, I feel as though people, how do I say this? It's almost as though people are raised with different sorts of values. And I feel as though there's less almost, either it's permission or there's maybe more support around not feeling good or suffering or whatever you want to call it, and more babying of that than actually accountability of this is really bad. Like how can we get through it? How can we figure this out? Not necessarily speaking as a therapist, but just I feel like that has changed. So when you ask about the question about how has that accountability changed, it's changed vastly. And I don't have the exact solution or answer, but I do think it has to do with just people not being allowed to struggle a little bit in order to persevere, be resilient, find a sense of spirituality, get through it, and sort of get support to get to the next step.
Also, there are so many ways now to distract and numb ourselves. Right? We don't really have to sit with those feelings for very long, because there are all kinds of ways to just escape. So we have much less distress tolerance than we did in prior generations, where people, just had to endure a lot more suffering. And they also just had to be much more patient than we are. They had to wait for stuff, right? I mean, if they wanted a doll for Christmas, like you just had to wait and hope you got, a little doll that somebody maybe made for you. And there weren't like a lot of other options. And that's just not the world that we live in now. It's this real instant gratification.
Do you share the same views on psychotherapy as we were talking about, or do you have a different perspective?
I think psychotherapy can be conducted in many ways. And the heritage that I came through, Jungian analysis, spiritual awareness psychotherapy, is one in which we are actually made more agentic and more responsible through an awareness of our divinity and continuousness with the universe. We really matter, each of us. And who shows up today really matters. It all counts.
Yeah, and Jung, was a trained psychoanalyst, and I'm pretty sure he trained with Freud,
yes.
right? And then he had this huge departure based on his own spiritual awakening and his own spiritual experiences. And, his writings are fascinating because there are a lot of mandala-like images in his writing curated from his own dream work. So he just, took off into this very different space, the whole notion of the collective unconscious. So it's not just my unconscious and your unconscious, which again was Freud's nomenclature, but that we actually share this collective unconscious with these archetypes, sort of like the hero archetype, the shadow archetype, that have endured like memes through our culture. These are all really fascinating ideas.
The Red Book was his mystical experiences.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
One of the things when you do the math on therapy, I think it's just interesting because you have 168 hours in a week, right? How much progress can someone actually make if they're talking to someone for 45 minutes each week? I mean, that's 4 hours of 168 hours, and then you have all this other time. And therapy itself is interesting because how old is it? Like 200 years? So what did everybody else do through the rest of history when we didn't have therapy?
Eat as a family.
Yeah, they talked to friends. They confessed to their
relatives.
Right. They engaged in communal, shamanic rituals.
Yeah. They went to a spiritual center.
Right.
It usually was church. Or
they communed with nature, which is in and of itself a spiritual experience.
Right. Went to the temple.
Yeah.
Went to the Anipi.
Yeah, and I think just found a solution. Whereas I think that we've turned that around as a collective where it's instant gratification. It's if you're suffering, this is bad, and we have to get you out of it. Some of it, you kind of have to work out. That's in part, I think, where some resilience comes from, and I think that therapy has been very meaningful in my own life, and I said recently, so I've had a therapist since residency because we were encouraged at Harvard to, you start training, you don't talk to people about therapy, you have to be in therapy, which I thought was a good thing. And I think most residencies work that way. But I remember speaking with the supervisor who said to me, "Are you in therapy yet?" And I was like, I thought he was reprimanding me. He was actually being kind and sort of saying, "Oh, I think it's about time. Here's a list of names." And I called 2 names. And one of the 2 people answered my call, returned my call, not in lifetime, in real time, called me back and has been my therapist since that time. So when I hear in my conversations, I also feel it's a lot about how a person approaches it, whether that was a good fit, whether it's not. Their ability to sit with their own difficulty and pain and discomfort and see what happens in that relationship. And a lot of the individuals I work with, sometimes I'm patient and I'm thinking to myself, well, you're right. I mean, I'm not sure that anyone gets better with that limit of it, but analysis is much more frequent. If someone is in analysis, it's usually many more times a week. But with therapy, it's different. So I do think that it's a guide to how can you either find the best match fit for someone who you can work with. And I do think Zoom makes that very hard for people who are starting a new relationship with someone. I think that is hard to do on Zoom or on a virtual platform. But that being said, I think if you need to talk to someone, you should definitely try telehealth if that's your only option. But for me, it's been an ongoing developing relationship that has been very meaningful in my life. And I would hope that other people can find their way to the form of therapy that works for them.
Yeah, I want to just add to that. I think, one time per week for 12 weeks or 6 weeks, this is sort of short-term psychotherapy. It's evidence-based for what that's worth. And it can be helpful for some people. The bigger problem, and this is a huge and underappreciated problem with psychotherapy, is that it will never scale. There will never be enough psychotherapists for all of the people who could benefit from it. There just will never be. That will never happen. And that's really the fundamental problem. There are too many people on planet Earth. We can't have a psychotherapist for every single person. And if you look at especially, I'm often awed by my psychotherapy colleagues who do DBT work, dialectical and behavioral therapy, because they're essentially reparenting some of their sickest cases. I mean, it's multiple phone calls a day. It's an absurd amount of time, absolutely absurd, to get people, a little bit more functional. It doesn't make any sense when you look at it from the scale of populations and also, frankly, economically.
I think that's an excellent point, and it also made me think of a couple of real life stories which I've read about and seen about the dark side of that. There aren't enough therapists, and we cannot scale to the level that we can. And I think the New York Times even had an article about that during COVID because the resurgence of telehealth and all of that. But there's also this other dark side where teenagers, in this instance that I recall, that at least 2 to 3 stories I heard about teenagers engaged in what was a fake kind of bot online that they thought they were having a relationship with, and in both cases led to suicide. And the parents were trying to find their way back from not understanding what didn't. In one case, the parents did not know this; they just thought that the withdrawal of their son
was this ChatGPT.
I don't know if it was through ChatGPT or where he discovered this.
One of the AI large language models.
One of the AI models, and
one of them actually wasn't ChatGPT. It was
but he thought that he was having a relationship with someone.
It was one of the characters from Game of Thrones.
But it appeared as a character online, though.
Yeah. But he had so it was sort of an avatar that he had a relationship.
And I don't know how he got access to it.
Yeah, that case is in the courts now.
Yeah. And thought that he was being instructed to kill himself by the
right. So getting back to sort of to tie some of these themes together, the inability for us to scale psychotherapy is part of what has contributed to a lot of people wanting to look at tech as AI therapy, right? Which is a good idea because that could scale, right? The problem is that the way that the algorithms are designed is to do exactly what I described as bad therapy, to validate, to praise, to, indiscriminately agree with, such that I was recently interviewed for an article about couples who were struggling, some of whom were just struggling a little bit, not that much. One of whom then turned to like an AI therapy model. And once they started talking to that AI therapist, basically got more and more enraged with their partner, started wanting to, like, every single thing the partner said or they said, they would record it and then import it into the AI model. And then those marriages very quickly deteriorated, and those people separated and got divorced. So, I mean, yes, it would be great if AI could help us, but, so far I've seen little evidence of it.
Psychotherapy research, for instance, work by Barry Farber, shows that it's the alliance that you spoke so beautifully of, Uma, the human connection that is transformative. A great deal of the outcome depends on the alliance.
Yeah, but you can make what feels like a really strong alliance to an AI therapist, right? Because they're so validating and so sycophantic, and they're not helping you get better and make positive changes in your life.
So that's not really an alliance.
Well, I mean, depends.
It's a human-to-human love.
Kids that killed themselves really thought they had this what could be called
Sure.
an alliance.
I think
that
so.
was one thought they were in a relationship. So yes, it was the Game of Thrones. And the other case, if I recall, at least three, but thought that, they, that their negative feelings were being validated.
Yeah.
And therefore, didn't say kill yourself, but made the young lady feel, this is.
I thought it was a young man. I thought it was a young man. Anyway, I probably think of a different case.
So I from my perspective, I would say neither of those cases were authentic alliances with a therapist. That the real transformative power of a therapist who has your best interest in mind, who comes to know you, who walks with you through seasons of life, and that is a relationship. And I think that a great deal of the horsepower in therapy is in the being, the humanness, the spirit of the therapist.
That's right.
And
that's why the LLMs won't work. They may be able to scale, but they won't work for that human connection.
Yeah, can you actually can a robot walk with you through? I mean, it might be able to give you
this is what I wonder about. I mean, the way that the algorithms are designed now is to optimize watch time.
Yeah.
They're not optimized for healthy change. But is it possible that they could be optimized for healthy change? Maybe.
Well, that's the interesting question, right? And is the formula of CBT or ACT or IPD, the manualized treatments we have, is the formula alone enough for sustained, deep, and meaningful change? Or is there something cathected or enlivened by the human relationship? And
I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I think we all agree the human relationship is pivotal, and and that's the joy and the power. I actually see a lot of folks doing good work on Zoom, human to human, although I think we all prefer in person. I still think Zoom with a good therapist is better than nothing.
Yeah. I agree.
For somebody who's receptive to getting better. Mm-hmm. Not everybody is designed for therapy.
much better.
Not everyone is designed for therapy. I agree.
But but the question is, can we get healthy and effective change with a non-human entity that has been designed along, the lines of wisdom, accrued wisdom that we have? I guess I think maybe it's possible. I think it's maybe it's possible, but that's definitely not what we're doing now.
Well, I don't think a lot of people don't feel a sense of presence with their therapist to begin with. I mean, this is one of the big complaints is if you have 35 hours to 40 hours a week of therapy, I mean, you're seeing 30 to 35 people. It's like so many people. So at one end, it feels sort of ineffective of I don't know how a therapist has an emotional capacity to listen to 35 people in 1 week. It just feels like a lot emotionally. And then they have to, dump on somebody else because there's just so much stuff that they're
peer-to-peer supervision.
Yeah. But then the patient could really feel like that. I mean, I remember one therapy session I had probably 4 years ago, the therapist was falling asleep, literally falling asleep while I was talking. I felt like I had to entertain him almost because he was falling asleep. But I don't know how many other patients he saw that week. And that was $250 an hour. And so I don't know. I just feel like it's a hard problem. That's maybe where you get back to the community piece of people feeling a need to have a deep sense of connectedness with other people, with God or the higher power or stuff like that, because to put this on one person, it feels like it's very unrealistic that you would be able to be present to all 35 of your patients equally emotionally invested and tend to yourself at the same time. Feels like an impossible ask.
So who in your own life has listened to you like you've never been listened to? For me, it was my grandmother. She listened. She was truly interested.
Yeah, I mean, at my parents, one, I mean, part of it is well, they're not going to give you CBT, DBT type of thing, and they might tell you something. I don't know. That could. But
you're listened to.
But they're there. There's a presence. They might not know what to do, with any particular feeling that you're having. And I guess that's the work of parenting in general. Is when kids are going through challenging emotions, what do you even do with them? But I think there's a value in someone actually caring and sitting with you. And that's what you get at a long dinner of like 3 hours that you're talking to someone versus 45 minutes with a therapist. I don't know.
Well, let's talk for a second about what's unique about the therapy relationship, because there are unique things about it. And the main thing, as I always say to my trainees, is that we as therapists need to come to therapy with our cup full, meaning we have to have our sexual, emotional, and intellectual needs all met. We have to be well rested and well fed, right? So that we can be there fully awake to this person's experience. You know, that we can listen with our hearts and our minds to what's happening to them. And then we can reflect with them and for them, you know, either according to a specific protocol, or if we work in a more eclectic or intuitive way, you know, just sort of what enters for us, or if it's spiritual way, you know, what we see symbolically. There's some wonderful descriptions of Jung's interactions with patients. Like he'll use, you know, serendipity, things that happen spontaneously in that moment and find meaning in them. Anyway, it's all that sort of thing. And that is a very unique experience for most people, right? To go into a safe place, a private place, a confidential place, and to have this person fully attentive to help you. And you don't have to think about helping them or meeting their needs. So that's the idealized version, right? Again, you take AI and all of a sudden, like AI they don't have to go to the bathroom. They're not going to fall asleep, right? They're not going to get angry as long as the algorithm didn't program to. They're going to attentively listen, you know, metabolize what we said, regurgitate it back, bring in the collective wisdom of all the other people who are using AI and put their crap in there and their good stuff too. So, I mean, it's an interesting moment.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions, and I feel like people are trying to sort through this, because the predominant mindset of largely erasing stigma in America, the mental health revolution of the 2010s, is like everybody was like, get in therapy, and it's just been this like mix of bad therapy and good therapy, and I don't know, people getting disillusioned with it and if it's actually going to work for them. One of the things I wanted to get back to, you were talking about, just acceptance and commitment therapy, I think is interesting. The idea that there's going to be some things in our life that we're going to be hit with that we can't change, right? And, you know, all three of you have been through like challenging circumstances. You've lost a child, you were in a profound period of childlessness, and you've also
5
had
years.
Yes, and you've also had a lot of physical health. We're talking about your back and being in chronic pain and stuff like that, and you went through cancer as well. And so, both from a professional and a personal standpoint, what do you feel like the audience needs to know about suffering and things you can't change or you wish you could change?
Well, I think there's an opportunity for a shift from the life I envisioned, the life I thought I wanted in a really narrow way, that carrot that was so bright and orange, to turning on the floodlights and saying, what is life showing me now? A more awakened perspective. What is life showing me now? And seeing roads open that never, roadways open that never would have been there otherwise. You know, I found my son because I was praying in an inipi with the Lakota. And that night on the other side of the world, after 5 years, was found our son. As we prayed for sons in the inipi, was found a son on the other side of the world. There was a journey that I would have never dreamed of, and a child I could have never found if I had only continued to hammer away at the life I thought I had planned versus the abundance before me.
I think that you know, when you go through a certain level of medical, emotional, physical suffering, I think there's a very consequential moment that I would ask the audience to wonder if they've ever experienced when they're facing something like that. Because for me, I was at a you know, a really good point in my life and career, feeling quite healthy. Nothing was wrong. And like I say, you know, I went because I was blessed with outstanding medical care, and I I went from lump to line in 7 days, and my mind hadn't caught up with me. I mean, my body was going through every single test that was needed. And at because it was so fast, the morning that I was facing my chemotherapy, my first chemotherapy, I was wondering, are they going to find a line? I mean, like they can find a vein. What's going to happen? All of this stuff. I experienced anxiety in a pretty severe way, which I'm fortunate to say I hadn't really had in my life. Hadn't had that level of anxiety, and I decided at that moment. There were 2 points. One, when I discovered the lump, I decided at that moment, I somehow knew, and I linked this to my spirituality actually, I somehow knew that it was going to be rough for a while, but I was going to survive it. I somehow knew in that moment, at that point, I wasn't going to die. So that was good. And then the second point was that morning, and I decided that I was going to have to endure a ton because I knew from the tests what had to be done. And that I had to find the strength, again, that I think came from a sense of spirituality, having a community, having my family, a community. But that morning I was facing it alone. Everyone was in my life, but I had to go through it. And that point of resilience where I sort of picked myself up and decided my mindset was going to be a certain way. I was going to tap into every single thing I knew, because on the one side, there was the doctor in me that knew every single horrible side effect I was about to face. But on the other side was, what was I helping people with? How to eat healthy, how to live healthy. I created this model around my life. I didn't expect to be the blueprint of that model. But that was what was so humbling. It was like, why am I not making my grandmother's chai every single morning again? What happened that I stopped making it for a bit? But that was a very pivotal moment. The second, because I decided it was mindset. It was like, I'm pulling all of this out and I'm going to do this. I'm going to fight this. It has to come from me. No one else can do it for me. People can support me, help me, love me, but I have to do it. And I think that for me, I will tell you that I would never wish cancer on anyone, but it was one of the most profound learning experiences of my life. And made me stronger. Wrecked my metabolism and probably most of my mitochondria, but I'm here just to say I'm okay. So it taught me a lot, and I do feel that very strongly.
Wow, thank you for sharing that.
Sure. Happy to.
Yeah, I mean, I have had similar types of experiences. You mentioned that we had a child who died, and what I realized was that, of course, there's the grief of loss, but I compounded my grief by trying to run away from my pain. And it really wasn't until I just stopped and, turned toward that pain and said, I'm going to feel this to some extent for the rest of my life. There's no amount of psychotherapy or, medical information or pills or, what have you, that is going to take away this enduring pain. And so for me, that's really become the lesson that I learned and have to learn again and again, because we have such problem-solving minds, and we reflexively approach pleasure and avoid pain. We do it unconsciously. We have to think about not doing it. But I find even now when I'm in distress, if I can somehow access my suffering and just say, you know what, you don't have to get rid of this. You can just hold it. You can just hold it. Something really interesting happens, and I just feel some relief. I feel some relief, and I feel more hopeful. Yeah.
May I ask you a question? How did you walk your other kids through that?
Well, this was our first child.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but certainly the loss of a child, even before our other children were born, has informed sort of our family narrative and our experiences. So, yeah, we talk about it.
Yeah, a lot of those moments are like both of your perspectives are very countercultural. And and also probably the opposite of what people would and are running to or intuiting to do in the moment. To come on the other side and say, cancer, like, it made you stronger. It's just like a radical thing to say. And then also what you're saying as well. And I don't think personally, like, we have the language or the wherewithal to even know how to do that. And I guess that's where the spiritual perspective comes in.
Post-traumatic spiritual growth, where we're made more. Right? More.
Yeah.
I think trauma actually kicks open the door. We don't have a choice. The world as we know it isn't holding. The world as we know it is shifting under our feet. And so we can't hang on. And it's in that moment where the eggshell cracks that we actually are available, profoundly available to Source or God.
What is the difference between going through those sorts of experiences with a materialist mindset, physical world is all there is, versus this world isn't all there is?
I mean, I'm not sure we even need to dichotomize it like that. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's funny how we just want to say it's either the material world or, I mean, to me, it's all one. It can be all one. There doesn't have to be.
Well, if you've had horrible things that have happened to you,
yeah,
and you live with a mindset of this world is all that there is. So there's all these horrible things that happened to me, like there, like some form of meaning making that's been that is made in the process. Because then you sort of get into like nihilism, and I'd imagine that just really takes your emotional state down the tubes. I don't know if you guys experience that in your practices or what, or if I'm off on that or what.
Well, I'm kind of reflecting back on what I said and thinking about things that I've read about in different real life stories of people that have come from horrible circumstances and have found some either glimmer of hope, seen something, met someone that profoundly changed the path and took them out of those circumstances. And I sort of relate to that because, in that moment, maybe it wasn't as articulate. What I was trying to say is you have a decision to make. And you can either fold and endure horrible side effects. And trust me, when I hear about friends, colleagues, family that go through it and have a very different experience, it's hurtful because I wish I could help. And I know I can't because I know that inner decision, which, if you don't mind me saying, I think, you lose a child and you decide, well, when you feel ready, you have another child, or you have more children. You have to, at a certain point, or you decide that you're going to stop that path, but you opened up a different path, and therefore you have your son and your daughter. So I do think it comes from within, and it's a choice. And I think that's not a judgment, it's not pressure on anyone, but for myself, that's where it came from. And that actually helped everyone else around me, because if I had it, they felt stronger.
Yeah, imagine that allows you have to feel those feelings of despair. I mean, whatever you think about what happened in our country this past month, the reality is, like, when you see that, it just, like, it really articulates you could be lying next to somebody in the morning and then they're dead. And then so you're never going to talk to that person, at least in this life, ever again. And the amount of feelings that come along with that is devastating.
So my father died within this year, and he was my hero. I adored my dad, and I have felt his presence, and I've been in relationship with him since he crossed over, and he's been very helpful. I mean, so my father was a very creative theater director and informed how I see all of life. And my mother's a very loving and loyal, caring person. And I had this moment where my mom showed up at the house without my dad, and it felt unbalanced. Mm. And I felt this profound sorrow by the imbalance. And my father came and said, "Father, Son, Mother, Moon," implying that he had been and is the light through which I see everything. He is the illumination. He's the lens through which I see everything. So I feel there's an ongoing relationship I experience with my father, not just in my memory, but that it is active and alive and dynamic at the level of soul, spirit, consciousness. Most of the world thinks this way. Day of the Dead, ancestor worship. And what our published studies show is that when we sustain a relationship with our loved ones who've crossed over, we are less depressed. So this appears to be, at very least, how we're built.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of gets at some of the things I was talking about earlier. If you live with a materialist mindset, my loved one died, and then I'm never going to see them ever again, and that's just it. Versus there's somewhere else. There's like another place. How those two things interact is a much larger conversation, But I think, that provides a clue. But if we were to kind of in the home stretch of this conversation, we talked about therapy, talked about suffering, medication, all these big picture ideas. If someone's listening, what do you feel like the goal is for them with the mental health conversation? Like, what would you advise them? What would you like to see as we move forward from this point in time?
So I'll start off just by saying that I think for each person, it's a decision around and this might be longer than you need, Matthew, but I think if you are suffering and you're going through something, speaking to a mental health professional, and I underscore that, and I'll tell you why, is really important to try to get an assessment of where you're at and what you need. You might have a church counselor, a spiritual center that has counseling that can help you sort through that. All of that is in the realm of how I think, as long as you are not actively suicidal, in an active state of psychosis, actively manic, or have such profound symptoms that you need to be in a hospital. I think there's a very clear line there. But I also feel as though, food, lifestyle can be a component of how you help yourself. Finding the right connection to a human, it could be a therapist, is some of what we've spoken to. Also, if you have a spiritual center, have access to that, a center within yourself, but also an outside community. I think that's key. What I want to be careful about is that one of the things that has become a little bit of a pet peeve for me is, I was taught how to set a fracture. I was taught orthopedics, but I don't talk about orthopedics now because it was early on in my career. And I know that that's not top of my learning and education right now, but I'm actually often disturbed by the number of my medical colleagues who are talking about mental health in a way where they probably did a rotation a very long time ago, like I did my orthopedic rotation, are not actively seeing patients, and are speaking to elements of mental health, which I have to say with respect, they're not qualified to do anymore. So I would just say to people, it doesn't matter if a person has a medical degree. If you need the kind of help that you might need, it could be that you need a trained mental health professional. That could be a social worker, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a nurse practitioner, whoever it is that your health system allows for. Because I think that also makes social media very confusing to people. And I'm a big believer that unless you've talked someone off a ledge in residency, which I did, or you've been in a training situation. That's what residency does. That's why we have so many years of training and fellowship and all of that. Yeah. Because you at least leave with some equipment to be able to handle human emotion. And so I just want people listening to say, well, yes, if you need help, absolutely go for it, but get it from a trained mental health professional.
So the former Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, said there were 4 pillars of health: physical, mental, social, and spiritual. Spiritual health is an essential pillar, 4 legs of the table. And indeed, when we look at the science, we see that we are innately spiritual beings. We know this through twin studies. We know this through MRI studies. It's very easy to lose sight of the spiritual leg of the table. And yet it is essential to whole person health and wellness. I would go so far as to say that the spiritual core is the hub of whole person health and wellness. So my suggestion would be to, no matter how engaged you are, and it is extremely important to stay healthy physically, mentally, and socially, it is equally at least important to attend to your spiritual path. And you'll know if you're not paying attention, because bang, 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 there'll be yearnings, there'll be pangs. Those are opportunities. That does not mean you're off the path. The pangs of emptiness mean you're being beckoned. You're on the path.
That was super from both of you. Thank you. Very helpful. I guess I would say that, we've talked today about medications. We've talked about psychotherapy. We've talked about spiritual pathways. There are many roads to the top of the mountain. And I would say to somebody out there who's struggling with mental health issues, try different stuff. What works for one person may not work for another. Just get out there, stay hopeful, and try different things. And if it's not working for you, don't just keep banging your head against a brick wall. Try something else. Although I 100% agree that we are innately spiritual, I also think some of us are more innately spiritual than others. And so, a spiritual
human distribution.
Yes,
that's
curve. Right. And so, a spiritual path might really resonate for some and just kind of be off-putting for others. So there are a lot of things to try, and just get out there, keep the faith, stay hopeful, and try different ways of healing, and be open about it, right? Don't just have it, be the thing that, maybe is that the culture is telling you to do. But the other piece of it, which also gets back to our conversation about empathy, it's not enough to just feel better. Our lives need to be grounded in the virtues, right? Don't kill other people. Don't lie, cheat, and steal. Try to be the best person that you can be. Try to help humanity. I think this is really important, and more important than ever in this world of siloed
So
feedback. Service
Yeah.
is another great one. Yeah. Like the ethos of we are here to help each other. We are one people. Again, let me just emphasize, if you are in a siloed feedback loop somewhere in an online community where people think it's okay to go and kill other people that you disagree with, that is not a well community. That is not the path to healing. That there's nothing right or good about that. So I just think, again, thinking about bringing it back, the ancient philosophers, the ancient theological traditions, all of which echo the exact same things. It's very fundamental. Don't kill people. Don't hurt people. Try to be kind. Try to be of service. Don't lie if you can help it. Don't cheat. Don't steal. These are so simple and yet so hard to do.
And that's so profound, because what I hear you say is that how we treat other people affects our own mental health.
Absolutely. It's a selfish program, as they say in the 12 steps. It's a selfish program.
Which is a shift from do unto others as they would do unto you to do unto others as you are doing unto you. Yeah.
Yeah, because you're not really a human being if you're not living in the virtues. You're some aberration of a human being.
Yeah. I really appreciate what you both said, but I had one thing I wanted to add. Given what you each said, but also in what you said, there's this interesting anonymous, I think it was a letter or publication from a woman physician talking about the principle of, do no harm. Like, let's not kill each other. Let's not kill people or encourage that. And she wrote openly, but anonymously, about a group that she was in. You may have seen this, Matthew. And I think it was a Facebook group of women physicians. And she called it, it had turned into being cultish, which was why she was uncomfortable, because a certain opinion was brought forward about something that happened in the news. And people who disagreed or had, had a different opinion to the people leading the group were ostracized in the group. And I just think those basic principles, it comes back to that. No matter who you are, where you are in life, let's just not hurt other people. Let's stay with those principles, which have grounding in how you're raised in your sense of, for me, spirituality. But for others, it might be something else.
Matthew, I have a burning question, which is I would be so interested to hear a bit about your parenting playbook. How do we build a more empathic, resilient, alive nation? What do we do? Parenting playbook.
Yeah. So in my book, Dopamine Nation, I do talk a bit about my own parenting, mostly mistakes I've made. But one of the main messages that I try to relay in the book is the importance of transparent parenting. So being honest with our kids, and also being willing to share our mistakes. But the other thing is to give real feedback. Like there is not a lot of real feedback in the world anymore. And we need to get real feedback in a safe space where we know we're still loved, but where we can come to recognize our character defects and try to be better people. And if parents aren't doing that work with their own children, we're in trouble because they're not going to get it anywhere else.
That's good.
I'll speak to it from the lens of my parents, and I don't think anyone has perfect parents, but I also feel like I learned a lot of values from them, and those are things I feel I bring forward in my work as often as I can. And you mentioned earlier something about, I can't remember what it was, but it made me think of how my parents helped motivate us. So as a little kid, I took all sorts of, I danced, I did ballet, I played musical instruments, all sorts of stuff. But I would take exams for these. And I'd been somewhere and saw this beautiful wristwatch, it wasn't an Apple Watch. This was before Apple Watch, but a beautiful wristwatch. And it was, as a kid, that's fascinated me. So I wanted a wristwatch. And I know it seems like a small thing, but my parents said, well, that's a good idea. That would be look very good. If you, achieve this grade or this, I think it was my piano exam I was taking, let's look at whether we could go choose one together for that. But when you think about it, the reward was much more associated with helping me be better, because I really wanted that watch. And what it did for me, I didn't think it was negative or bad that they asked me to do. I thought, oh, well, I don't have the money. So why don't I go, practice more, do extra lessons here, study harder to do it. But honestly, that simple lesson taught me so much in life. Which is, it doesn't come for free. My parents could have bought me I didn't grow up in a rich family, but they could have gotten me a watch. But they wanted to attach something to it that was of meaning to me. And they taught me a lot of value through that method. So
that's great.
I'd share that was helpful.
My final question is if you're just looking into the eyes of someone and they feel disillusioned with this conversation around mental health, maybe even somewhat hopeless, maybe even feel like they've hit a wall of how much they could be helped, what would you leave that person with?
I would say there's always hope. Hope may be the most important thing. And I think we get the most hope when we make connections to other people. So I would really advise that person to just identify one human being that they can connect to and try to make that meaningful connection.
I think that we need to be very direct and say it is never acceptable to take your life, ever. There's no conditions under which it is acceptable to commit suicide. I know someone who I love very much who took his life, and 2 years later was found a very promising cure. You never know what you're going to miss. There's information you don't have. But I do think that hope is not just a wish. It is grounded in the nature that there's something in life that is regenerative. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So jumping off what both my lovely colleagues here said today, I would say that, I think there is always, if there's one, there are many threads that brought this conversation together, but one of those threads is hope. And I feel like even in that darkest moment, always realize that if you make a decision about your life, you're leaving your loved ones behind in a way that will impact, having been on the other side of that and lost people to suicide. You don't recover from it. And those individuals won't. So as bad as it feels in this moment, there is a thread of hope that you can pull on. Maybe person, a community, a spiritual center, something that you have. And I would just ask people to reach for that.
Well, this was a fascinating conversation. Thank you all for being here. There's so much to chew on for people and think about. So appreciate you guys being here.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you both.
Yeah.